Southern Baptists need to understand what the issues are. And it pains them to think that there are some in their leadership that have gone off the track, that have gone a direction that is unbiblical, unsound in doctrine, which I certainly would say that social justice is unsound in doctrine. There's a need for someone to sound the alarm, to be the watchman on the wall, to say we've got a problem here, and if we don't deal with this problem, it's going to impact our ability to do missions and evangelism into the future. I've been in pastoral ministry for 38 years. My greatest interest in ministry has been preaching and evangelism. And I believe those are the two methods by which people are saved: the preaching of the Word and personal witnessing. God called me to preach when I was an officer in the Navy, and I resigned my commission in the Navy and went to seminary and began pastoring in 1982. And then because of my military background, I had the privilege of also serving as a chaplain in both the Navy and the Air Force. I retired from the Air Force in 2005. Most of my military career was reserves, and so during the time that I was serving as a reservist, I was also serving as a pastor of a local church. I'm serving as a trustee from Georgia on the Southern Seminary Board. I've been on the board for 6 years now. Because of my love for the convention, I felt like it would be appropriate, and it was certainly an honor to be asked. I wanted to give back to Southern Baptists. Southern Baptists have done a lot for me, and because I was asked to serve, I was willing to do so. The first several years that I served on the board, I felt like things were going very well. Dr. Moeller has a tremendous reputation coming out of the conservative resurgence for many of the very positive changes that he made. I knew some of the people that were on the board at the time he was elected as president 27 years ago. And of course, the changes that occurred at the seminary were significant, and returning the seminary to its confessional documents, the abstract principles, and then the Baptist Faith and Message was, I think, very critical. And after several years on the board, I did become concerned that while there was a lot of emphasis on the inerrancy of Scripture, there was seemingly less emphasis on the sufficiency of Scripture. And so some events occurred that just kind of raised some questions for me. One of the issues was the use of Sam Allberry. Sam Allberry is a alleged celibate homosexual priest from the Church of England. He's Anglican then in his theology. His philosophy runs along the lines of same-sex attraction, and the conception that that same-sex attraction is an acceptable Christian position. Now, I believe that sin starts in the mind, that it's our thoughts that we have to control to overcome sin. Allberry's position was problematic to me. He worked at one time with an organization called Living Out, and their documents can be found on the internet by anybody. And these were very troubling. And so Dr. Moeller and I had some conversations about using Allberry's material and using Allberry as a speaker. Initially, he was very defensive of Sam Allberry. Later, he said that he agreed with me that some of his positions were problematic and that he could no longer commend his ministry or recommend him as a speaker. And yet, sometime after telling me that, there was a podcast put out by Southern Seminary where one of the professors interviewed Sam Allberry, essentially extolling his ministry and encouraging it. And when I questioned Dr. Moeller about that, he asked essentially, well, what do you want me to do, remove the video? And I said, yes, I think that would be appropriate if you would do so. And although it was indicated to me that that video would be taken down, it never was. You know, I chose not to press the issue at that point. At the same time, information that I was receiving from professors and students, a concern that the seminary was moving in a direction of support for the woke movement, that social justice was gaining a foothold. I obtained a copy of some class notes from Dr. Jarvis Williams' class, and if anybody were to read those class notes, it would be very clear to them that Dr. Williams was teaching CRT, critical race theory, and intersectionality. When, again, in a trustee meeting, questioning Dr. Moeller about that, his response was, well, we're not teaching critical race theory, we're teaching about it. Now that's concerning to me because when I was a student at Southeastern back in the 80s, one of the issues was the historical critical method of interpretation of the Old Testament. And the president of Southeastern at the time had stated that we're not teaching the historical critical method, we're teaching about it. But I was in the classroom having JEPD crammed down my throat. So I knew that that wasn't true. Then on top of that, we have the provost, Dr. Matt Hall, going on a podcast stating unequivocally that he was a racist and that he would be a racist until he died because of his skin color. I've known Dr. Hall for a number of years, and I've never seen anything about him in terms of his actions or his words that would indicate that he's actually a racist. I think what the issue is false humility and trying to press this social justice woke narrative. And this is not something that I believe that our students at Southern Seminary need to be taught. Dr. Moeller initially, with Matt Hall, his response at that point was to defend Matt's credentials and qualifications, which were never in question. The man is eminently qualified. He was gracious. He was given the opportunity to explain his statement, and his answer essentially was, I probably should have chosen my words more wisely. But to my knowledge, there was never any time that he backed down from those words or changed those words. One of the suggestions that I had made at several meetings ago regarding social justice was to put forward the possibility of the seminary adopting as a governing document the Dallas Statement or the Statement on Social Justice. And I brought that up as a suggestion. Dr. Moeller stated that he didn't feel that the document was well vetted and that he had some issues with some of the things that it said. I felt like it would clarify the issue, but he made it clear to the full body of trustees that he didn't intend to pursue that. Now, there's a connection between the issue with some leanings towards social justice and my concern that in spite of the fact that Dr. Moeller has said he is opposed to CRT, it certainly appears to me that there's some inroads with CRT teaching on the campus. When the Statement on Social Justice came out, to my knowledge, only one professor at Southern signed the statement, and that was Dr. Russell Fuller. Now, there could have been some others that signed it that I'm not aware of, but to my knowledge, he was the only one who did. I did have a professor tell me, he said, I can tell you why the professors are not signed it, because Dr. Moeller forbid them to do so. Now, Dr. Moeller has said to me that, well, we only want to sign the official documents of the seminary, the abstract and the Baptist Faith and Message. Well, I can understand that to some degree, but we adopted the Nashville Statement on Biblical Sexuality as one of our governing documents. We've adopted the Chicago Statement on Inerrancy, both of which are excellent documents. I've had the testimony of several professors who have said to me that it was very clear that they couldn't sign the Dallas Statement on Social Justice without there being repercussions toward them and their careers. And I have to believe that there must be some faculty members at Southern Seminary who would disagree with what Matt Hall and Jarvis Williams are saying about social justice. And yet, we've heard and seen nothing. Now, I have to make some assumptions at this point that perhaps they have been told that they cannot speak negatively about social justice. I have the utmost respect for Dr. Moeller, and I appreciate so much the many good things he has done for the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary and the Southern Baptist Convention in general. I mean, when you listen to Dr. Moeller's daily podcast that he does about things that are going on in the society, and there's a tremendous amount of wisdom that he provides not only to Southern Baptists but to the evangelical and Christian community at large, and very grateful for that. It's really hard for me to understand how we've had this slide. It's a downgrade, if you will. And the slide is happening almost right under our noses. And so that's why we've got to sound the warning. And I have proposed, in fact, I proposed again at our most recent trustee meeting, I actually made a motion that we adopt the statement on social justice at Southern Seminary because I felt like that would be the proper corrective. If Dr. Moeller is correct that we're not teaching CRT, then one of the ways to demonstrate that, and one of the ways to give all of our professors a tool that they can use for what we do want to teach, would be to adopt that statement, just as we did with the Nashville statement and before that, the Chicago statement. It would seem to me that there is a desire sometimes among those on the academic side of the equation to kind of live in both worlds, to be acceptable to a secular mindset. So we're against CRT, but we're not really against it. And it becomes a bit clandestine. It's an inability to tell the whole truth. And as someone said one time that a half-truth is a whole lie. If the truth gets out that we really are teaching CRT, but we have said that we're not, that's not going to look good. But yet we're trying to appease the world by making it appear that we're making every stride that we can for social justice. Back in the spring of this year, we terminated several professors. Those terminations are, I think, directly related to the position the seminary is taking on social justice. One of the professors terminated, obviously, was one of the professors who signed the statement on social justice, and two of those professors were clearly in opposition to the seminary's current position on social justice. The reasons for the terminations were an anticipated financial downturn due to the pandemic. The anticipation of a 30% loss in revenue due to the pandemic was possibly overstated. I certainly think that it needed to be taken seriously and that the budget needed to be reduced. I think in the end, the downturn is probably going to be more in the 10 to 15% range, but that's still something that has to be dealt with. But Southern certainly is not an institution that is in financial trouble. It wasn't long after these professors were terminated that new professors were hired. It doesn't look good to say we're firing 7 professors because we're not going to be able to afford to pay them and then go hire several more. There's no question that financially they could have absorbed the hit, kept all of these professors in position, and what a blessing and benefit that would have been to our students. I mean, these men, particularly Dr. Fuller and Dr. Orrick, invested in the lives of students. When I was a seminary student, the professors at my seminary never showed any interest in me. They did not ask me about my personal walk with the Lord. That is a very positive thing at Southern. I think many of our professors are involved that way. That's one of the things that I have really liked about Southern Seminary, is that so many of the professors are involving themselves that way in the lives of students. But if there were 2 men who set the example in that regard, it would have been Russell Fuller and Jim Orrick. The document that the seminary uses is called a separation and release agreement. And in that agreement, there is an NDA. Now, the people might recognize that as a non-disclosure agreement. This actually is not non-disclosure, it's non-disparagement. Immediately, I became concerned about that. We are supposedly terminating them because we don't have the money to pay them anymore. In other words, they're not being terminated for cause. They're not being terminated because they did something wrong. And so what it looked like to me is you signed this agreement, you agreed never perpetually to ever say anything bad about the seminary or its administration, and we will pay you severance pay. Well, there's a number of problems with that I recognized right off the bat. The separation and release agreement is a violation of 1 Corinthians 6, where the Apostle Paul tells us that we should be able to judge ourselves, that we should not go to court with one another. The document is a legal document. By its very nature, it is threatening. What it is saying is that either you do what you've signed to do or else. Well, I asked specifically what the or else was, and the answer was we would not take them to court. But that's the threat. I mean, that's what you're holding over their head. And he said, well, yes, we found threatening them works very well. Now, from my perspective, we're talking about this, is this the right thing for Christians to do? This seems to be bearing false witness. Dr. Moeller and I discussed this thoroughly, and he absolutely disagrees, that he does not believe that it is in any way a violation of 1 Corinthians 6. And, on that point, we just had to agree to disagree. And I'll let people that are smarter than me determine who's right and who's wrong on that, but my opinion remains the same. I mean, I did everything that I could to appeal to the President to cease and desist from using this non-disparagement clause. I can only conjecture at this point. Now, I can tell you what he told me, and I can tell you what I think. What he told me is that, well, it has to do with employment law. And my response was, what employment law? Let's be specific. What exactly in employment law requires you to do this? Well, we can't say anything about someone we fire. Well, I'm thinking, well, why do you need to say anything about someone you fire, especially if you're not firing them for cause? And what we were doing, I believe, is using the pandemic almost as an excuse or a cover for removing people from the faculty that we didn't want. Now, one of the things that I was told is that it was a contract, essentially, that it was a two-way contract, that the seminary also would not be able to say anything negative about these professors that had been terminated. When I finally got a hold of the document, I discovered that was not true. It was a one-way covenant. It was binding only on the terminated employee. Now, to Dr. Moeller's credit, he finally admitted that the document itself did not bind the seminary in any way, other than obviously to pay the severance pay. But that brings up another problem. The severance pay wasn't really severance pay. Now, as you know, educators in general are paid for 1 year of service. And most of the time, their academic responsibilities will end maybe around the 1st of May, or at least by the 1st of June. So they're paid through July, and their new contract picks up in August. The truth of the matter is that these professors' severance pay was simply to be paid what they had already earned through the end of July. I can't call that severance pay. I call that earned pay. And if they would sign this separation and release agreement, then they would receive that pay, and of course their retirement benefits and insurance benefits and so forth. I don't know any way to look at that other than hush money. In other words, we're going to ask you to sign an agreement that you're not going to say anything bad. There's no reason to do that unless you suspect that they might have something bad to say. Now, my argument would be this. If, as a trustee, if we have a professor that's being terminated, even if it's for cause, if that professor has something to say negative about the seminary, disparaging toward the seminary, or the administration, or the president, or the board of trustees for that matter, I would like to hear it. Now, as a trustee, I want to say, maybe we've got a blind spot here. Maybe there's something that we're not seeing. Maybe there's something that we're missing. And this could be pointed out to us, and if that's true, certainly we could take corrective action and get it fixed. Now, if somebody has just got a burr in their saddle, certainly we have enough people in the administration and on the faculty that could correct any misconceptions and make clear what the truth is. So why do we need to do something that makes it look like we're paying hush money? I'm a war veteran. I'm an Afghanistan war veteran. And I went to Afghanistan for one reason, and that is to protect the rights of my fellow American citizens. I served my country so that men like Russell Fuller and Jim Orrick would have the right to say what they needed to say to protect their First Amendment right. It angers me a little bit, to be perfectly honest with you. I hope it's a righteous indignation. I don't want to give anybody the impression that I'm mad at Dr. Mohler. I'm not mad at anybody, but I am righteously indignant that we would ask good and godly men to sign away their First Amendment rights to free speech. Our First Amendment rights were not given to us by the government. They were given to us by God, and the government said, we'll protect your God-given rights. Russell Fuller and Jim Orrick were men of conviction, and they refused to sign that document. What troubles me is that we have treated two of our professors shamefully. We have withheld money from them that they legitimately earned. Now, I don't believe that they should have been let go anyway, but we make matters worse when we terminate them and we don't pay them the money that they were earned. So I came to the board in our last meeting, and I notified all of my fellow trustees ahead of time by email what I was going to do. I contacted the chairman to let him know what I was going to do. I sent a copy to the president. I didn't do this clandestinely. I let them know what my intentions were. To be honest with you, I didn't know whether I would get a second. I had two trustees that indicated they might second my motions, but my first motion was to have the president require the administration to pay Dr. Russell Fuller and Dr. Jim Orrick the full pay and benefits that they would have received if they had signed the separation and release agreement, and that those monies should be conveyed to them in a timely manner, but in no case no later than 30 days after the board meeting. That motion failed because it never got a second. Now, I made a second motion, which I assumed probably would also not get a second since the first one didn't, and that was that the whole issue of the non-disparagement agreements, the separation and release agreement, that it be eliminated and that no new document replace it until approved by the Board of Trustees. That motion also failed. I want God to bless Southern Seminary, but there's a tremendous amount of emphasis on, there's never, literally in the history of Christendom, been more preachers being trained, more MDiv students in one place at one time. Listen, I am all for that. I really am. I think that's wonderful. But that's, as a trustee, that is not my greatest concern. I don't want Southern Seminary to be the biggest and the brightest and the best in terms of numbers and finances. I want Southern Seminary to be known as the seminary that is the most faithful to the Word of God. That there's never been another seminary that has trained its ministers, trained its pastors any more faithfully than the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. That needs to be our concern. And if our concern is only the number of students that we have, and if we're going to spend our time bragging about how great we are in terms of size and in terms of, financial stability for the future, while I am for all of those things, if we compromise our theological position, all of that's going to come to an end anyway. There's certainly a point at which we need to be very, very concerned about the direction that our seminaries are going in terms of social justice. The fact that someone says it's not happening does not necessarily mean that's true. And what you have to do is you have to research. All you have to do is go look for this stuff. It's out there. The videos are out there, the panels are out there, the statements are out there, the documents are out there. I want to be very careful about how I say this, because the last thing that I want to do is to make unfair accusations against anyone. And I want to say again, I have great love and respect for Dr. Mohler and many of the wonderful things that he has done for our convention and for our seminary. But one of the things that I have noticed from the time that I was a seminary student is that there's a bit of arrogance in the academic world. And it almost comes across sometimes as that, well, we know better than you. We're the guys with the PhDs. We're the guys that have studied. We're the guys who know this stuff, and you're just going to have to trust us. And what I want to say is that, okay, we'll trust you, but we're going to still look at the evidence. We're still going to look at what's being said and what's being done, and we're going to try to make our own conclusion about the results of all of that. And that's my appeal to my fellow Southern Baptist pastors. What happened with the conservative resurgence is we got leaders who saw what the problem was, began to state what the problem was, began to then share that down to the pew, and Southern Baptists became so concerned that they began attending the Southern Baptist Convention to do something about it. We need the same thing to happen again if we're going to turn this thing around. I don't want you to leave. I don't want you to stop giving to the cooperative program. I want you to get involved. I want you to get involved in your local church. I want you to do your work of ministry, but I also want you to be aware of what's going on in your seminaries, in fact, in all of our SBC entities, and be concerned about it. What I want you to do is get yourself elected as a messenger and come to the convention and vote your convictions. We're facing a very important election. It may be the most important election ever in the history of the United States. Go to the polls and vote your convictions. We've got to do the same thing with our own Southern Baptist Convention. We have got to care enough to make whatever sacrifice is necessary to go to the convention. But we have to go informed. We can't go and just listen and do, in essence, what we're told to do by the leadership. We need to hold the leadership accountable. Just like we need to hold our government accountable. I mean, we are a government of the people. We are a convention of the pew. And we need to stand up for our Southern Baptist Convention. Otherwise, we're going to lose the influence that God has given us to reach the world for Christ.